Hello everyone, it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This week we're looking at what is perhaps the most powerful mechanic ever, and that is Phyrexian Mana. Phyrexian Mana is limited to a single set, New Phyrexia, and there are only 24 cards that carry this mechanic, which allows you to pay life or mana of a certain color for all or part of the cost of a spell. And 17 of those 24 cards have put up at least one top 8. In a lot of ways, Phyrexian Mana was a mistake. It made all of the cards effectively colorless, meaning any deck could run them, and it even made some of them cost 0 mana. Free stuff is frequently a problem in Magic, and it was this time too. Phyrexian Mana sits at a 7 on Mark Rosewater's Storm Scale, which means that as a mechanic, it's unlikely to return, but possible if the right environment comes along. And I do not think it is very likely that we see this again, even though it says possible. I don't see a situation where we can use this mechanic again and not have it be completely broken, but that's okay, because these cards all already have a major impact on the game and continue to, despite there being so few of them. First, a quick reminder on how I score these. Pro Tour top 8s are worth 2 points, Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. I also include Legacy and Vintage Championship events as Pro Tour top 8. So let's move to number 10. At number 10, we have Apostle's Blessing, which for only 1 mana can help keep your creature alive or make it unblockable thanks to protection. It didn't really see play in Standard or Block, but it found a home in Modern and Infect decks. These decks, of course, try to kill the opponent in 1 or 2 swings, and Apostle's Blessing allows you to protect your creature when your opponent tries to kill it with removal after you pump it. Since the banning of Gutaxian Probe, the Infect deck has struggled to remain relevant, and new cards have been printed that rival Apostle's Blessing's playability, like Blossoming Defense, for example, which for the same 1 mana provides a stats boost and hexproof. So Apostle's Blessing may not be putting up any more points, but because there's not any other cards with Phyrexian Mana or any that are really close to Apostle's Blessing, it'll probably stay at number 10. But let's move to number 9. At number 9, we have the first of a few spells that cost 0 mana on this list and 2 life, and this one is a combat trick, and it is, of course, Mutagenic Growth. It saw play in Block Constructed, putting up a top 8 in Mono Black Infect, and another in Tempered Steel, which was an artifact creature-based aggro deck. In Standard, it saw play in Tempered Steel as well, but also in Splinter Twin, and it saw the most play in Blue-White Delver. In Modern, it has primarily seen play, again, in Infect decks, which can use it to pump their Infect creatures and rapidly in the game, and most recently it has seen play in Death Shadow Zoo, where the growth can effectively pump Death Shadow +4/+4 for 0 mana. At number 8 is Birthing Pod. A lot of the cards on this list are overpowered, but Birthing Pod is one of the worst defenders. It is held to only number 8 on this list because of all the bannings it suffered. Birthing Pod was insanely good with creatures with Persist, and it could allow you to turn your entire deck into an incredibly consistent combo or toolbox deck, where the plan was to get Malira Sylvok Outcast, one of your creatures with Persist, and a Sacrifice Outlet into play. You could then gain infinite life or do infinite damage. Sounds sort of like Magical Christmas Land, but Birthing Pod basically made Magical Christmas Land a reality. It first saw play in Standard, showing up in the eponymous Bant Birthing Pod, Naya Pod, 4-color Pod, and Zombie Pod decks, but it wasn't incredibly successful in Standard, believe it or not, only putting up 6 points. Modern was where it was a real problem, though, where more combo and toolbox choices were available, and the decks there were utterly dominant. At Grand Prix Yokohama in 2012, it put up 5 Grand Prix top 8s, and it put up at least 1 Grand Prix top 8, and usually more than 1 at each Grand Prix when it was legal, and its dominance led to it being banned in Modern in 2015, and it still remains on the ban list, and it doesn't seem likely it will get unbanned anytime soon. At number 7, we have another free spell. This one is a burn spell, Gutshot. Doing 1 damage doesn't seem like much, but it turns out doing 1 damage to a creature or player for 0 mana is actually pretty great, especially in formats where 1 damage is enough to kill a lot of creatures, and when you're playing colors that normally can't get kill a creature effects so efficiently, and as a result it has seen play across several formats. In Standard, it saw play in Blue-White Delver primarily, where it could be an incredibly efficient removal spell that could actually kill your opponent's Delver of Secrets, and it could actually flip your Delver of Secrets and help with other spell-centric effects in the deck. In Modern, it's seen play in Affinity and Death Shadow, and was also part of the broken Eldrazi decks of 2016, most of which didn't run anything but colorless mana, so it provided those decks with removal. At Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch, the Modern Pro Tour where Eldrazi were still legal, all 8 of the top 8 decks ran at least 1 copy of Gutshot somewhere in their 75. In Legacy, it managed 4 top 8s between 2012 and 2013 in Maverick and Death and Taxes. Despite all its success, it hasn't actually managed a top 8 since 2016, though it doesn't seem like a stretch for it to show back up in Modern. At number 6, we have a clone that can be cast for only 3 mana, and of course, played in a deck of any color, like all the cards on this list, and that is Phyrexian Metamorph. Like all of these cards, the fact that it could see play in any deck made it an incredibly widely played card, and it was also incredibly powerful. In the worst case scenario, it was the best creature in play when you played it, or the best artifact if you needed it to be. In Standard, it saw play in a ton of different decks with various strategies. This included Cobblade decks, Splinter Twin decks, zombies, green-red aggro, and red deck wins. Its most enduring home, though, was probably in Birthing Pod decks, another Phyrexian Mana card, where it could act as an additional combo piece for the deck, since it could copy your creatures that helped you combo, or your opponent's Birthing Pod in a pinch. It also sees play in Modern. This includes in Birthing Pod decks, though that deck has been banned for a while now, but also includes Rug Delver, Jund, and Eldrazi aggro. Phyrexian Metamorph has even been strong enough for Eternal formats. In Legacy, it's found its way into creature-based combo decks like Painter, but it's also found its way into Maverick. In Vintage, it has appeared in Eldrazi aggro decks and Mud. Both of these are decks that don't really run colored mana, and that is the format where the Metamorph is still seeing play today. At number 5, we have Vault Scourge. Phyrexian Mana makes it so this guy is basically always a 1-mana 1/1 with lifelink and flying. On its own, that wouldn't necessarily be incredible, but he happens to be an artifact, and there are plenty of artifact strategies that love low-costed creatures with evasion, and they can make him bigger. So usually when this guy hits someone, he isn't just hitting them for 1. He also could gain you the life back that you pay for him, unlike all the other cards with Phyrexian Mana. In Block and Standard, the best ways to pump him involved Tempered Steel, an enchantment that gave +2/+2 to all artifact creatures, and in Modern, it's been run in Affinity decks alongside Arcbound Ravager and Cranial Plating, both of which can make the Scourge easily swing for 8 or more damage. Affinity decks have been a powerhouse in Modern for a while, and that is where this imp has found himself the most effective. He is picking up tons of points every year, and is likely to continue to move up this list. At number 4, we have a free counterspell. Sounds like a good idea, right? And that card is Mental Misstep. You would think Wizards learned their lesson about free counterspells after the overpowered nature of cards like Force of Will, but they took another crack at it in New Phyrexia, and they took something of a mental misstep. They figured that making it a very narrow counterspell, only countering 1-mana cards, would keep this from being overpowered. But that wasn't the case. Not in formats loaded with powerful 1-mana cards like Delver of Secrets, Birds of Paradise, Avacyn's Pilgrim, Ponder, Vapor Snag, and you get the point. It could counter a lot of stuff just in the Standard of its time, and as a result it had a home in basically all decks. Since it wasn't only free, it also didn't actually ask you to use blue mana. It was most successful in Cobblade, Splinter Twin, and Blue-White Delver. It has been, or is still, a staple in the Eternal formats. In Legacy, it hasn't seen play since 2011, thanks to being banned, but while it was legal, it was basically a staple. Grand Prix Providence in 2011 proved that, with 7 of the top 8 decks running Misstep, and the 2011 Legacy Championship deck had 6 decks running the card, and this type of dominance was enough to get it banned. It has, of course, never been banned in Vintage, and it continues to see a ton of play there. At the Vintage Championship in 2013, it was in 7 of the top 8 decks, in 2014 it was in 6 of them, and in 2015 it was in 4 of them, and so on. It sees play in basically all decks in the format, except the more combo-oriented ones, and you can bet that it will continue to be the case. At number 3, we have another free spell. This one is a Graveyard Hate card, and it is Surgical Extraction. This is particularly good against graveyard strategies, as it can be cast in response to a reanimation spell, and it can remove a key part of the deck. Unlike the other cards on this list, this is mostly a sideboard card, but it is an important one, as it is a good way to keep certain decks in check. This has most frequently been cited in against reanimation and dredge decks, and has seen sideboard play in basically every format, and will continue to as long as graveyard strategies continue to be relevant. Right now in Modern, it is actually seeing some play in the main board of Lantern control decks, a prison deck that basically gets to determine what you draw each and every turn, and can mill the top card of your library whenever it wants to, and then use Surgical Extraction on what they hit, and this results in removing one of your threats, and basically the goal of the Lantern control deck is to just make all your threats go away, and then they just sort of coast to a win. Legacy, where reanimation decks are at their best, is where this has seen the most play, and it even has one Vintage Championship top 8. At number 2, we have the third card on this list that has been banned at one point or another, indicating just how big of a mistake Phyrexian Mana was as a mechanic, and that is Gutaxian Probe. Sort of like Gutshot, this is a card that doesn't seem like it does a whole lot. You get to see your opponent's hand and you draw a card. What's the big deal? Well, having a probe in your deck essentially makes your deck 56 cards, so it becomes considerably more consistent. It also turns out that the information it gives you is especially useful in certain decks, like Infect, Splinter Twin, and Death's Shadow, all of which needed to be careful about trying to put their combo together that would one-shot the opponent. If your opponent has a way of interacting with what you're trying to do in their hand, you just don't go off. You just try to play around the fact that your opponent can interact with you. There are also several Spells Matter type decks that love to have a spell in them that is free to cast, and as a result, it has seen play in every possible format. In Block, it showed up in Mono Black, in fact. In Standard, it saw play in Splinter Twin and Blue-White Delver. In Modern, before it got banned, it saw play in Storm decks that loved having a free spell, such as Pyromancer Ascension, as well as Splinter Twin and Infect. Most recently, it was abused by Death's Shadow Zoo decks, who could use the information to decide whether or not they're going to try to kill the opponent, and the loss of life actually added to Death's Shadow power, too. Death's Shadow Zoo was the main reason this card got banned, but of course the deck has managed to survive the banning. It has shown up in Legacy, in Storm and Delver decks, as well as decks like Sneak and Show, where the extra information can be used to determine whether or not trying to cheat a creature into play is worth it. Gutaxian Probe was even so powerful that it was restricted in Vintage, where it saw a ton of play in various Delver decks, as well as Monastery Mentor decks. And at number 1, we have one of the most efficient removal spells ever, and it can of course be run in a deck of any color, because why not, and that is Dismember. 1 colorless mana to kill any creature with 5 or less toughness is insane, and as a result, Dismember sees a ton of play, putting together a huge score of 257 across all formats. It was obvious to the pros that this card was ridiculous. In Block, it put up 6 Pro Tour top 8s, showing up in a variety of decks, both aggro and control. In Standard, it saw play alongside other cards on this list, in Delver decks, Cawblade, and Tempered Steel. It had multiple Grand Prix in Standard where it put up 6 or more top 8s, indicating how ubiquitous it was. It has seen the most play in Modern, though, regularly showing up in Affinity, Infect decks, Jund, Birthing Pod decks, and most recently, like basically all the cards on this list, in Death's Shadow Zoo decks, where it not only kills a creature, it pumps Death's Shadow's power and toughness at instant speed. It sees play in Legacy too, of course, in Delver and in Merfolk. Most Merfolk decks are mono blue, so normally they don't have access to removal like this, but they do because Phyrexian Mana. Like several cards on this list, even Vintage wasn't safe from Dismember. It sees the most play in artifact-heavy decks that don't run much colored mana, like Tezzerator, Mud, and Stacks. It gives them a removal spell that they just wouldn't have access to otherwise. Dismember is still seeing a ton of play across non-rotating formats, and it doesn't seem likely that any card will ever surpass it on this list. That does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And also, my videos are sponsored by 5colorcombo.com. You can use my discount code NEETSAHONE5 in their store for a 5% discount. Thanks for watching.